and this comes about how you're going to test your database. Activity 4 asks you to text your input forms. So we're only going to do this for the forms, including any calculations, validations, and macros using appropriate test data: normal, erroneous, and extreme. What that means basically is what happens when you test and it puts it in what you're expecting it to be, okay, which is normal data. Erroneous data is basically what happens if you put in data that is invalid, okay. So for instance, if a telephone number had a letter in it, all right, so it potentially was the right length, but it wasn't a number. And then extreme is when you have a borderline between the two. So that's the sort of thing that you would be testing if you wanted a calculation to, for instance, deal with numbers that were greater than or equal to 5. Okay, then 5 would be the borderline. So what happens when you enter 4? What happens when you enter 5? What happens when you enter 6? So 1 would be the borderline, 1 would be the typical data, and 1 would be data that you wouldn't want to be in there. Okay. The video itself, we're just going to focus on how we're going to add those macros. Okay. The testing process is quite a long process, because essentially what you're going to do is every time you add a particular calculation into your macro, you're going to have to run it and test it and take screenshots of what happens. Okay, you're going to have to read the activity very, very carefully in terms of whether they want you to take screenshots of what happens or whether they want you to create a table to say, yes, this did what I wanted it to do, yes, it gave me the error code, yes or no, it didn't work. Okay, so the testing process is quite a long process, although learning to do it is not a long process. I have shut down my database and reopened it to make sure that my main menu did pop up, and yes, it did. And you'll notice that I've also put some background colours on that as well in the design. Okay, so we are now going to create some macros for, I think we'll do it for the add new cleaner to start off with. Okay, so you probably remember that when we were in the cleaner table, we were thinking about, let's go into the cleaner table and let's go into the design. Okay, so it's not really liking that very much. There we go. Okay, so when we were thinking about each of these things, we were putting in these validation rules, which says it is not null. And that's fine if a person is going to be altering the data directly in the table. But that is not how the interface works. So in databases, all the data is stored inside these tables. And for the majority of databases that function within society, what I mean by that is essentially, I don't know, I went into Specsavers the other day, and they use forms in order to access my information. Okay, they're not actually looking for my information in the table, they're just typing things in the correct forms, in the correct boxes to access who I am via my date of birth and my name. Okay, if they were to enter a new customer and to miss out information, that wouldn't really send up any errors. But we all know that when we're using forms, for instance, on the internet, that we get those little error boxes that pop up. Okay, so although we have validation things within our tables, we actually need something that's going to kick that off in our form. I'm going to close my menu because I don't really need it at this time. Okay, and I'm going to go into my create. Now we've used our tables, we've used our queries, we've used our forms, we've used our report. The one thing that we haven't done so far there is used a macro. So I'm going to click on that macro. Okay, and we don't really need the action catalogue at all, but it can stay there for the time being. Okay, so on here we've got a drop down menu on our macro, and I'm going to click on the one that says if. Now you'll notice here that I also have the little builder icon, and that's good. So I'm going to click on that. So basically my step 1 is to click on the if, my step 2 is to click on my little builder button. Okay, now what I want to do then is I want to focus on what happens from my form, and I'm going to create the same is null validation, and as soon as I start writing is, it comes up with a function is null. And if I double click on that, it comes up is null with the brackets set up already. So I need to do this for all of my forms. Remember, we're only creating our macros for our forms. We're not really going to bother with our main menu form, because our main menu is all it's doing is controlling and opening all the things that we've done. Okay, and first of all I'm going to go for add new cleaner. Okay, so essentially what I want to do in here is think about all of the fields that I have and making sure that those fields are populated. Okay, so the fields that I have were generated completely and utterly from the table. So they've gone using the default. So the bit that says label is the bit where on your form you will see cleaner ID on the left hand side, and the cleaner ID is the actual ID. So we want to go through each of these things and make sure that they are not empty. Okay, does that make sense? If I'm just going to cancel all of that a little minute and press no. If in your cleaner table, then you have got the one that says here new already, i.e. when you look at it in its design, it's an auto number rather than a number, okay, then you wouldn't have to do the macro for that one. But we've got numbers being set, and therefore it's really, really important that all of the cleaners have the cleaner ID. Okay, so I'm going to close that and start again. So just to recap, we go create, we go macro, and then number 1 is selecting if, number 2 is selecting our builder, and then we want is null. Okay, so in our forms we want our add new cleaner form, and we're selecting form and we're selecting what is inside the text boxes. So nothing that says label, just what's inside the text box. So when I click on cleaner ID, this thing that comes up that says value, what I do is I double click on value and all of this pops up. Okay, and then I just click OK. Right, that is the first one done. Now at this point in time, it is really, really good to add your action. Okay, so basically is if it's null, what do I want it to do? Okay, so at this point I've got this add new action and I've got a drop down, and essentially what I want it to do is I want it to pop up with a message box. So this is how any form or anything like this on the internet works. Okay, and I'm going to type in a message. Now, it's quite good to have consistency. So your message would maybe say, please enter a cleaner ID. Okay, you can leave the beep to yes, that just means that it will beep when it pops up. Okay, and the type is absolutely fine. You can leave your type to none. Okay, it will be non-specific. And then the title, when we run it, you'll see what the difference is. The title will be what appears at the top. Okay, so what you want potentially is say it's an error, and my error is going to be no cleaner ID given. Okay, basically what you're saying is the user has left it blank because it is null, it is empty, and this is causing me an error. Okay, and we're going to do that for every single part of every single form. Okay, but right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control and S and save my macro. Okay, so I'm going to save this as I'm actually going to call it add cleaner validation macro. Okay, so that's now saved. Okay, all right, now we can I thought I had saved it. Okay, cannot pass the expression is null forms, add new cleaner ID, click OK. Okay, I was getting the error because when I entered the expression I forgot to finish it off with the close brackets. Okay, so in my expression build a bit, I needed, although I double clicked, I needed the curly brackets at the end before I clicked OK. Okay, so now I've been able to save my macro, so I've got my add cleaner validation macro. Now, when you're doing the testing, you literally need to test everything little bit by little bit. Okay, so right now it can't run it because the actual form is closed. Okay, so instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my add new cleaner. All right, and I'm actually going to put in a test the macro button, so that I can test it as I go. So in my design view, in my form, I'm going to include another button in here. Okay, so this other button is going to be really, really important because every time we click that, don't know why it does that whenever I've closed it down. Okay, so whenever I've clicked that, that's going to enable me to then run the macro and to see what happens. Okay, so we don't want any of these form operations or anything like that. We don't want anything in there. We want the miscellaneous one. So we want to be able to run the macro. We've only got one macro, add the cleaner validation macro. Okay, the text is fine just to run the macro. Okay, and we're going to potentially call this test button. Okay, so now I've got this test button in, which is going to help to run my macro. Okay, so now when I do this, and I run the macro, okay, it's now coming up with exactly what I entered in my code. So the error section was what we entered on that last line, no cleaner ID given. Please enter a cleaner ID, and I press OK. Okay. Now, that shows that I have tested it now with data that is invalid. I now want to test it with data that is valid. Okay. So essentially I want to give my cleaner an ID. I think the next one in the list is going to be 33, and I run the macro. Now no error actually came up at that point, okay, and that means that that has now worked. We don't have any borderline data. So remember, we talked about having 3 different types of data. So we've got normal data, typical, that's what we expect it to be. That's what I've just put in and tested. I've put in the data that is invalid. Okay, in other words, I have left it blank. So now I have run that macro, and I need to provide evidence to the examiner that the macro worked when I left it blank, and that actually no error message popped up when I put information in. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. I'm going to say yes, I want to change. Okay, and now it's telling me that I must enter a value in the table cleaners field. Okay, so I'm actually going to I can't save the record at this time, okay, which is absolutely fine. All right, so that's how the running of the macro essentially works. So we need to go through every one of them. I'm just going to leave it up. So we've put the first one in, is null, add the new cleaner. Okay, so once it's done that and I've added in a cleaner ID, it's then going to say what is now my new action. So I'm going to add another else if. Okay, when I click on that, okay, the same sort of thing happens, and I go on to the next one. So I type in is null, I go to the same form, and I'm still on adding a cleaner. So I've done the cleaner ID, okay, and now I want to do the supervisor, double click, remembering this time to put in the brackets at the end. I don't need to have the spaces. Okay, I can take the spaces out. It just sort of tidies it up a bit. Okay, and I press OK. That's absolutely fine. All right, what do I want to happen? I want to get a message box, and again I'm doing the same sort of thing as I did here. Please enter a supervisor ID and I'm going to say the error was no supervisor ID given. Okay, so that's absolutely fine now. Save the macro. So in my cleaner form, it's asking me to supply a cleaner ID. If I run the macro, please enter a supervisor ID. I press OK. I now need a supervisor ID. I run the macro, no errors come up. So now I'm absolutely fine. And then I can work on to the next one. So you're kind of seeing how it's working all the way through. So I now would need to, remember I'm registering a new cleaner, so now I need a cleaner name. So I go back and add else if, okay, and then again I need it to be there, so form, add a new cleaner, I want a cleaner name, value, close the brackets, okay, and then new action, I want a message box that says please enter a name, and then the error is going to be no name given. Okay, alright, so I want to run that macro. It says you must save it before you run it. Alright, please enter a name. Okay, so because it's open, it knows that it's not in there. So let's call this one Adam. Run the macro and it's fine. Okay, and you literally just keep on going through and going through and going through. It is really quite tedious. Okay. Add a new cleaner. So we've done the name, now we want to do the surname, double click, put in the brackets at the end, press OK. The action is the message box. We're always going to do a little message box. Please enter a surname, title, error, no surname given. Okay, run the macro. Yes, I save it. So because we've already got data entered in these top ones, it does the if, and then it does the next one, and then it does the next one. So as we're going through the form, it's then saying no surname has been given, enter a surname. Okay, and we'll just, because I'm feeling really unimaginative, and there we go, the macro is working there. Okay, so we can carry on, we can keep going down the form. These get more and more and more and more as we go. Okay, so we want an is null. And we want a telephone number, value, and we're okay. And then another message box. Please enter, try and spell everything right, a phone number. And the error is no phone number given. Okay, when we come to run it, it says we want to save, please enter a phone number. Okay, so here all the macro is checking for is that we've actually got some data in there. Alright, so when we run the macro now, it's saying, well, that's okay, because actually we've got some data in there. It's not empty, so that's valid data. But we all know that that's not actually valid data for a telephone number. Okay, so we need to think about what extra things we need to what extra actions we need to add in around our phone number to check that it is actually a valid phone number. Okay, so back into our macros. Alright, so we've just done the null part of the phone number. And for some reason I lost my little icon at the bottom, so I've just found one and then I'm just moving it down. Okay, so is null for the telephone number, and this time I'm going to use is numeric. Okay, so again I'm going to find my form and find my telephone number. So add a new cleaner and my telephone number and my value. Finish off the brackets, equals false. Okay, so what this does is actually, I don't know whether you noticed that when we clicked the is numeric, it told it came up with a Boolean, which basically means is that it will test is it numeric, okay, and if it's not numeric, in other words, is it a number, equals false, okay, it will then pop up with the message box that we want. So not only do we have a telephone number to say we need to have one, but also we need a telephone number one to say is it in the right, is it actually a number. So this is not a valid phone number. Okay, so the error is non-numeric values. Okay, so when I run the macro now, it says this is not a valid phone number. Why is it not a valid phone number? Because I put in a whole load of gobbledygook in letters. So now I want to make sure that I have put in, okay, a valid phone number. That's the right number of digits. Okay, and hopefully that will run okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just knock off a few digits from the phone number and run the macro. Okay, so it's now telling me that there are non-numeric values. Alright, and potentially that's because I've left a gap in there. So now when I run the macro, it doesn't think that that is at all problematic. So it doesn't think that it's problematic because I haven't actually said what format a phone number needs to come in. Okay, so we'll see whether we can fix that. So back into our macros then, and we're going to add another else if, and again use the expression builder. You'll need to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling for these. Okay, and then we're going to use something called length. So returns a long containing the number of characters in a string or the number of bytes required to store a variable. So we're going to use this again, and we're going to find our telephone number again. So that means that there are 3 things that we have got on our telephone number. We're going to finish off our brackets, and this time we're going to use that in there. Okay, so you've got a sort of a less than and then a greater than sign. Okay, so what you want it to therefore be is exactly 11 digits. So what do we want to happen? We want message box to say please enter don't know why I keep spelling enter wrong. Enter a phone number of 11 digits, and the error is invalid phone number length. Okay, so now I know that this one works because I've got stuff in there where I haven't got. Okay, so where was I? 493211, that's the school phone number. Run it and it's absolutely fine. Okay, we are now almost done with this particular one. So we have got 2 more things to do. So we've got to do is null for our gender. Okay, and our message box is going to say please enter M or F, and our error is going to say no gender given. Okay, we're going to run our macro. Yes, we want to save it, please, and so no gender given, please enter M or F. Okay, run macro, perfect. Okay, very last one, guys. So okay, so one more to go. Another else if, another is null. The last one on the list is a email address. So that'll be the cleaner email. Value, curly bracket, okay. Message box. Please enter an email. Error. No email given. Okay, run the macro, save it. Please enter an email. No email given. Okay, and then we're not going to overly complicate it by saying that we want it to check for an @ sign and things like that, but if you find that that is what is required in your exam, you can always Google how to do that. There's just an awful lot to remember and we want to get the basics done. Okay, so when I run the macro, that should be absolutely fine. Now, the one thing that we want to do now in terms of ending, so we always need to have this sort of end if bit. Okay, so we're going to put on an else in here, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to get it to close the window. So at the end of running the macro, we're going to say I want it to close this form. So the object type is a form, and the form that we've been doing is adding new cleaner, and I want to leave the prompt, okay, in there. Now what that should do now is when I run the macro, is that should completely and utterly close it. Okay, so that is now all done. What I can do is then open this, and rather than having run macro, what I want to do now is I want to save this to being my save button. So I actually want to change that run macro button, and I want to make that the thing that says save and get rid of that save button. So what that does is means that if somebody tries to save it, what it does is runs the macro instead. Okay, if that makes some sort of sense. So it actually makes this save button now invalid. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And on here, I'm now going to click that and press save. Okay. Now when I close that, ask me, do I want to save? So now when I try and put in some data, let's just see where we're up to. So remember, we've just added a new cleaner. There he is, number 33, Adam Curtis. Okay. So now what should happen is when we come to add a new cleaner, and I say 34, etc., etc., let's put in some details. Okay, so it's now telling me this is not a valid phone number because I ended up putting a space in there. It now says I've not entered an email, so I need to enter an email. And then when I come to save it, that disappears. I can open my cleaner table and see all my information about Bob that I have just entered. So my testing my macro button actually became my save and my close button in reality. So you will have to go through and develop another macro. So create another macro. We've got an add cleaner validation macro. You want to add new job validation macro that goes through an identical process. I am just going to delete my records for Bob and Adam because all they did was help me to test my macro. And that's really about it. The only other thing that you have to be able to do is to write your evaluation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at school.